Ladies and gentlemen, gamers, hello and welcome to the channel. We got some super exciting news from Relic. And as you can see here, we have the community schedule for the next few months. And January, that's just a couple weeks away, that's going to be the multiplayer tech test, not a multiplayer beta. So they're using different terminology here. I'm assuming a tech test has something to do with, as you can see here, technical test insights, stress testing the servers, perhaps getting some feedback on not only gameplay but the new UI improvements. That like maybe last stretch feedback before the launch, as you can see here in February 23rd, guys. So we're just a couple months away from fully launching. I am so excited to be playing this tech test with you guys. I'm going to be playing this pretty much every day that it's available. Hopefully it's available for a couple weeks. But very cool to see that this is coming. I hope it's coming early January. That would give them about a month and a half time to really digest the feedback and implement any changes into the game. But yeah, super cool. So guys, we're rapidly approaching this. And then as you can see, we have the British trailer, a deep dive into the British faction. We've already seen two of these deep dives, the Wehrmacht and the US forces. And then in February, we have the KO3 launch. And I'm assuming right before that, we're going to have the deep dive of the Afrika Korps faction, which will be cool as well. And then in March, we have another Wire report. I'm assuming this Wire report is going to be an update on what's to come. And then we have a community play session and then a Q&A Twitch stream. So we can look forward to that in March. We also have, guys, an exciting announcement that Company of Heroes 3 is coming to console in 2023. Now, if you guys are like me, you don't care so much for the console, but I will say this: it's going to be good for the overall game. You know, bringing in new players, getting more exposure to the franchise. It kind of makes sense, guys, why we have seen a sort of shift to a new color scheme and contrast, new unit icons that look kind of mobile game-esque or maybe console game-esque, and now we know why that KO is coming to console. I'm assuming it's even going to come to mobile gaming, the iPad, in the future as well. So we know now why they chose that aesthetic design kind of template. But let's look at the trailer. Let's check this out. So sick.
We need that support! Now! Go! Flash! Thunder!
Company of Heroes 3 Console Edition, coming in...
Dude, I like how they put more production value and resources into the console trailer than they did to the last like 10 PC trailers. I mean, the original PC trailer was sick. I loved the original PC trailer. That was the best one by far, but I just find that funny. But regardless, it's good marketing. That looked fantastic. I can't wait for that sort of close combat in the Mediterranean that you saw there. The breach mechanic is something that is going to be introduced for the first time in the franchise as well. So very cool to see. Now, last thing I want to show you guys in terms of news is this blog post by John R.E. It's basically titled The KO3 Launch Content and Beyond. So you guys, I'll leave this in the description. You guys can go ahead and check this out. There's a lot of little details here. We're not going to break it all down. I don't want to bore you guys with all of these finer details, but a couple of points I want to highlight. So single player content, you guys can check all this out. There's a lot to unpack here between the two campaigns, Skirmish versus AI, which is standard. We have 4 factions at launch. That's the most of any co-game, so that's very exciting to see. We have U.S. forces, Wehrmacht, British forces, and Afrika Korps. 12 battle groups at launch, and the battle group system, guys, if you're not totally aware, is an evolution basically of the doctrine system in Company of Heroes 1 and the commander system in Company of Heroes 2. So they took those two concepts, doctrines and commanders, they formed a new system called battle groups, sort of taking the best of both worlds, what they've learned, mistakes they've made from the past, and really evolving the system for Co3. So there's going to be 12 of those at launch. There's 4 factions, so you can assume 3 per faction, right? And you can see it here. So U.S. forces are going to have 3, Wehrmacht 3. So they break down what that looks like. I think the British forces and Afrika Korps is particularly cool because you have Indian Artillery Division, right? You have, for the British, so you get that ethnic diversity that was historically accurate in the war, right? And then for the Afrika Korps, you get those Italian combined arms and Italian infantry battle groups. So that just really immerses you in the historical aspect of Co, which I think is amazing. Next point to make here, 120 playable units. That's great. It's a ton. 14 maps at launch, guys. That might seem like a lot, but it's not. That's actually very little. Very few maps at launch when you consider the fact that there's 4 game modes, 1v1, 2v2, 3v3, and 4v4. That doesn't leave very many maps per mode, right? So there's going to be some overlap there. But historically speaking, Company of Heroes has always shined with its community maps, right? The mods and community maps have always been the best. So I'm assuming the community is going to learn from these initial 14 maps and then iterate upon those and launch something even better for us as time progresses. So looking forward to that. It's going to be great. Custom games are going to be available at launch. It's awesome. Modding support. There's going to be more modding support than ever for Co3. So that's going to really help evolve the game. Features and systems. We've got quite a bit here. Tons of multiplayer content, or single player content rather, sorry. Full tactical pause. That's cool. I don't know how much I'll be using that, but I know a lot of single player fans are going to be using this quite a bit. And you guys, you never know. Maybe there's some very difficult instances in the campaign or single player that require this really, really, heavy tactical emphasis where you have to pause the game and really break things down. If that's the case, I love this feature, right? If there's some really intensive instances and battles where you need this, I think it's awesome. I just hope they're not just throwing this in there as a cool little feature when there's not a lot of utility for it, right? Tactical map, we can expect this for any Co game. This is one of my favorite features, period. I love the tactical map. Key remapping, as a StarCraft player, guys, this is absolutely huge for me. I really like to customize my hotkeys, and I'll do videos about that in the future, what that looks like, and how you can optimize keys for your playstyle and so forth. WASD camera control instead of arrow keys. I think that's really cool. Just keeps your hand on the left-hand side of the keyboard instead of having to go back and forth. It's a more natural feel. This is a very welcome change. Ping system, that's nothing new. Updated social systems. We desperately need this in 2023 for RTS games. We desperately need a better social integration for team games, for watching replays, for watching events, for connecting with the community. We really need updated social systems. So that's great to see. I hope they actually have evolved this over time. Next generation destructible environments. So this is super intense, guys. There's going to be a lot more destructible environments in Co3. One thing I'm a little worried about is like the end of a long match, everything is just rubble. Like artillery and tanks have just reduced the entire map to flat terrain. And that doesn't necessarily make for great spectating or gameplay experience. But perhaps if, let's say, destroyed buildings and walls actually create new cover, which I'm assuming they will, and we can expect that they will, that could create very interesting scenarios. And it could make the game feel very new and different every time, every match, and as the match progresses. So I actually am really curious to see how destructible environments will work. Tank riding, very interesting. I'm not quite sure if every unit will have this capability or not. I'm really curious how this is going to interact in multiplayer mode. I could see it being like, let's say there's MG positions set up around the map, and because your units are garrisoned on a tank, riding on the back of a tank, they're no longer vulnerable to being suppressed by MGs. So I find that very strong, but perhaps it's in a later stage of the game where it's not as impactful, right? I really want to see how this is going to interact from a balance standpoint. It's interesting. We'll see. It's hard to gauge how important this is going to be or how impactful it is. Okay, towing. This I love. I think this is so cool because think about it. Large team weapons such as the German Flak 36 or British 17 pounder can be rapidly deployed and repositioned to react to the shifting battlefield. So imagine, guys, that you have these large weapons that you've invested in, either a British 17 pounder or a Flak 36. What I love about this is, from a strategic standpoint, I love the idea of a player deciding to invest in one of these large weapons and the weapon being very impactful in the game for your team, but also being very slow and hard to assemble and hard to mobilize around the map. So there is a trade-off of this. If I choose to set this team weapon up on this portion of the map, I have to be very particular and careful about where I put it because it could become very vulnerable. So I love the idea of investing in a truck that is towing these large weapons around the map, which forces you to be very specific and calculated and methodical with your positioning. It forces better defenses. It forces, I think, more of a long, methodical game versus these things being highly mobile and able to move very quickly. It becomes a little silly, right? I love the realistic component to this. And I love the idea of having to tow it to the front line or retreat it back by towing it back to a support line, setting up. I love the investment of that, right? As an artillery, let's say an artillery division. One person who's playing artillery is really managing all these pieces on the map for his team. I think that's so cool. So I'm very excited about this. Breaching mechanic. If you guys have not heard about this, this is essentially allowing units to basically engage with an enemy building that's garrisoned. So let's say your opponent has an MG in a building. Instead of throwing a grenade in the building like you would in Co 1 and Co 2, or artillery in the building and so forth, what you can now do is, if you can get close enough to the building, close up enough, you can actually breach the building and get inside. Now, we don't exactly know what that looks like, but I'm assuming that this mechanic is not available to all units. I'm assuming this is something that's available to special units, right? So think special forces units, think airborne units. I'm assuming that's what this is, because otherwise I find it a little bit hard to balance. So I'm very curious to see what this is going to look like. Very exciting nonetheless. I think it's really cool. Side armor. This was so needed. This is such an important update. We really needed the game to have side armor implications in addition to frontal and rear armor damage. So I think that's great. Verticality, guys, this is absolutely awesome. I know I'm just totally saying everything is awesome here, but we'll get to the bad stuff too. Verticality is really important because in Co 1 and Co 2 it hasn't had a huge impact. In those other games, Co 1 and 2, it's been more of a form of RNG in the game. It's been very inconsistent. So to have a real system that determines cover advantage, height and elevation interactions between units, providing unique buffs, as you can see here, and debuffs to units. It just adds a whole nother strategic element to the game. It's another tactical implication in the game that you have to really be aware of and understanding the map terrain. And I just love this feature, and it's so cool to the feeling of being on the low ground and engaging with an enemy position on the high ground, and vice versa, right? I think that's very cool experientially for a player. Enhanced recon, we've seen this before in Company of Heroes. In RTS games, generally speaking, you do natural reconnaissance by the fog of war. So your units basically, of course, disperse the fog of war with their vision, so they can see. And that's your only real form of reconnaissance in a game, other than recon planes that go by for a period of time. Enhanced recon are specialized ways and abilities to basically see within the fog of war without having your units actually visualizing and breaking up the fog of war by being on the front line. So enhanced recon are ways for you to not have the same liability of potentially sacrificing your army by being on the front line to gain recon, although that's always important and needed. Enhanced recon is just another way to do that. So I'm curious to see if this is going to be that impactful. One enhanced recon that comes to mind is the Spotlight for OKW, and it's good. It's strong for sure. In StarCraft 2, if you guys are aware, with the Terran faction, they have the sensor tower that is extremely overpowered. It's extremely strong. So I'm curious what they're going to do for this, if it's radio type of reconnaissance or maybe a spotlight type of mechanic. But I'm curious to see how impactful it's actually going to be, because in Company of Heroes history, it hasn't been that important. Traversable trenches, that's pretty interesting. I like this idea that you can have a trench on the front line, and if your opponent has a vehicle, they can pass over the trenches. It's very realistic. And also what I like about this, guys, is let's say one player invests very early for infantry, and they set up a very aggressive stance formation on the map. They're putting a lot of pressure on their opponent, and then they dig into trenches on the front line, and they secure really good positioning on the map with really good resource accumulation. What I like about this is, let's say that the opposing player on the other side is on the back foot, and instead of investing in heavy infantry in early game, he goes for a tech path, a tech route, and goes for quick tech and gets a fast vehicle out. I like that the vehicle can pass over and circumvent this advantage that the other player had early, because one player invested in trenches and infantry and he gained an early game advantage, while the other player invested in tech and maybe a quick tank, right, very early, and he can benefit by passing over these trenches. So I like this build order dynamic and these mechanics in the game. You know, being a StarCraft player, these type of things are really, really impactful in a game. So I love to see this, and I'm very curious to see how it transpires in the game. So we have some cosmetics, cool, multiple language support at launch, which is great. All right, guys, we're going to get to the bad stuff now. All right. This is not good. Post-launch content. I mean, it's good that we're getting this content eventually, but I would have really liked to see some of this stuff in the game at launch, especially in 2023, especially with the delays we've had in the game already. So store, I think this is really cool. We want to support KO3 for years, Relic says, and they're going to be releasing a bunch of cosmetic things and ways for players to basically customize their armies and their units. And they say right here, players can unlock store items in two ways, with either a paid currency, war bonds, it's very clever, I like that, or an earned currency, merit, which is gained through challenges. Certain cosmetics will not be available with merit, but we'll keep an eye on things. Okay, so I love this idea. I love the idea of being able to pay for cosmetic things that don't impact game balance, that give you a sense of identity and flavor and maybe historical reference to the game. This is awesome. One thing I'll say about this is comparing to StarCraft 2, because StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 are my biggest experience in RTS gaming. I've spent all my life playing those. StarCraft 2 is a really interesting use case that I think Relic can learn from, and that is in 2010 and 2011, basically all of Wings of Liberty, the first StarCraft expansion, or the base game itself, Wings of Liberty. That game was extremely popular. It was StarCraft 2 launched also with the rise of Twitch TV and MLG gaming and esports. So it had this massive amount of interest and viewership. Okay. When Heart of the Swarm came out and Legacy of the Void, those are the two expansions for StarCraft, the game was rapidly losing interest and popularity to League of Legends. And StarCraft 2 did not pivot or change for many years. It was too late by then. And Blizzard finally, towards the last couple of years, they finally managed to make StarCraft 2 free to play. And that like tripled the player base, if not quadrupled it, maybe even more. I don't know exactly how much larger the player base is, but it is significantly larger than it was because the game went free to play. And what they did was they used the store and added a lot of cosmetics, co-op campaigns that you can purchase. It just added content. So I get that Relic is launching the game for a fixed price. That's fine, but I would really like them to move towards this store and cosmetic kind of monetization model, and then make the game free to play eventually. I know that sounds weird to say because we're going to be paying for it as the hardcore fans. I don't mind. I would really like them to learn from StarCraft in that sense, and we'll see how they actually. I'm sure they're aware of this, but I think it's a really important note that if they want to really integrate social systems and come out with new content and bring new players into the fold, it's all about scalability, and you really need, in my opinion, a better model for that. So we'll see. Challenges, I think this is a fantastic idea. I talked a lot about training mode in one of my videos, guys. The number one most important feature for KO3. That video really gets into training mode and what I think is really important for KO3 moving forward. I think challenges is a great way to not only teach, but it's a refreshing type of experience for players who want to refine skills and so forth. So very cool mode. I love this idea, especially if they come out with co-op and so forth. Rank seasons. Why we're not getting this at launch is really confusing. It's beyond me. I think this is pretty. This is a pretty basic thing that should be available in 2023. I would like to see this sooner than post-launch, but we're gonna have to wait for this, which is unfortunate. But hopefully they refine it and they get it right. That's more important than timing. Multiplayer maps, they're going to add more of those, of course. We talked about that. Replays. Okay, why replays are not available at launch is also shocking. This is the most disheartening news, I think. I don't... Like, replays is such a basic, fundamental, integral part of RTS games that it's kind of surprising that it's not available with the base game. And especially because the game is going to have events and tournaments and so forth. So they need to really prioritize this immediately, and I'm sure they will, but that's kind of, I understand them like not having the entire replay system finished, but the game should launch with at least the basic replay, which is just kind of surprising to me. But anyways, observer mode, we can assume that if they're not releasing replay mode, they're definitely not going to release observer mode. So this is very disappointing. I think these two features really add to the social dynamic of the game, especially with Company of Heroes esports. So I really hope that before any Company of Heroes esport events take place, at least any major ones, that these two features are added to the game. I would love to see learning tools added to replays and observer mode, but considering that we don't even have these two at launch, the whole idea of training mode and learning tools and added features is something that we're going to have to wait for. The first expansion is going to be all about single player. That's cool. And then game modes. They want to build new and exciting game modes. So hopefully those are a lot of co-op modes, team modes, and so forth. But guys, that's going to wrap up the KO3 launch content and beyond. I hope you guys enjoyed this. That's a little lengthier than I expected, but guys, The most exciting piece is, once again, January, a couple weeks away. This multiplayer tech test. We're going to be diving into this every single day.